To get started. Let's do this. Welcome, everybody. I'm Forum. We have Sadie here just from a perspective of what we're here to do is to talk about effectively integrating networking for career success. One of the things that, at least for me, as a coach, as somebody who has really dove into this world of networking, one thing that I would love for all of you to walk away with is to know that networking is not just about when you need something. It's something that should be integrated in your daily day-to-day. And so that is the objective, and that's what we want to arm you with. Let's go ahead and start. We have a lot of people joining us. Sadie, I'll have you start doing the agenda and I'll keep admitting folks as they come in.
Thank you. All right. So just to give us a little roadmap of where we're headed this hour, we're going to start with some introductions, an opportunity to work some of those networking muscles in the here and now. When we come back to the main group, we're going to look at therapy and coaching, how they're similar, how they're different, how you can harness the power of both. We're going to talk obviously about networking, why it's so important, why it matters, what makes it hard, and then some practical tips and strategies for how we can make it less scary, more effective. Finally, we'll wrap up with how we're going to engage some of the resources and skills that you already have, and combine them with some of the methods that we'll be talking about today. How can we get some integration and leave this space feeling a little bit more equipped, more informed, and with some solid resources to connect with and reference back to.
Beautiful. So we're about to do our first breakout room. And I said 5 minutes. I lied to everybody. Looks like we're doing it in 2 minutes. We're just going to do 2 minutes breakout room. Everyone's going to have 60 seconds as part of this breakout room. We just want you to just introduce yourself. And as Sadie mentioned, just start building those networking muscles. And so with that, you're going to get a prompt to join a room. I will warn you when it's time to switch when you're doing your parent share, and then we will come back to the group and get into the content. And so with that, you have your rooms. Let's go. Hi, Allison. Welcome. We're just doing a quick pair and share. So everyone's in breakout rooms. It's just to introduce themselves. I'm sorry I don't have you in a breakout room just because they've already started, but people will be coming back in about 30 seconds. Welcome back, everybody. Welcome back. You know, people are we'll give everybody about 30 more seconds to come back to the room, and then we're ready to get into the content. Great to see some familiar faces and names. It's always exciting to have that connection. All right. Beautiful. Welcome back, everybody. It's always a mix. Every time I do breakout rooms, you have people who are smiling and people who are absolutely horrified. I don't know which camp you're in. Maybe you're a little bit in between. However you feel, just keep that with you. Hold on to that because we will discuss that at the end of our webinar for the rest of the conversation today. And so with that, let's do this. My name is Forum. I go by she, her pronouns. I'm the Chief Coaching Officer of Vida. I am so glad to be here. The reason why I really wanted to have this conversation with you and also be part of this discussion is because networking, every single job I've had today has been because of networking. Any connections, my job today at Vida is to do a lot of networking. It's to build relationships. It's to do business development. All that happens through networking. It is not something that is natural for me. It's not something that's intuitive for me, but it is something that I have built skills along the way. At first, when I was just starting off, I thought this was something that you do when you wanted a new job or when you wanted something. That was always my mindset. I network because I want something. And now it's just become, I network because that's my brand and it's my reputation. I network because I learn. I network because it allows me to understand and keep a pulse on what's happening with people and how I can serve others. And so with that, excited to be here. Again, my name is Forum. I go by she, her pronouns. As I mentioned, I am the Chief Coaching Officer of Vida. We are a career and leadership coaching company. And one thing that we really believe in is we help you love your life. This isn't just about wanting to network. This is about wanting, what does it do for you and what does it do for those who are around you? Loving your life is the name of the game. We spend 90,000 hours in our lifetime working. We should love what we're doing. Doesn't mean it needs to be perfect, but it has to be something that we are excited about. A little bit of background, we've worked with thousands of clients, but what is more important for you to know is the satisfaction. The thing about coaching is it's only as good as what people get out of it. And so that 4.95 satisfaction, that's what we're looking for.
Thanks, Forum. Hi, everyone. My name is Sadie. I go by she, her pronouns. I am a licensed clinical social worker, and I'm the COO of Sage Therapy. We are a mental health practice. So in my role, I carry a clinical caseload. I'm a clinician, a therapist by training. I support clients in navigating career transitions, stress, life transitions, trauma. I also provide clinical training and consultation. And then in addition to my clinical work, I oversee our organization. And so I've supported our growth from what was just 6 of us, 6 Chicago-based clinicians, to now more than 80 employees providing services across 6 states. So I'm bringing to this conversation not only my clinical expertise around like how can therapy be helpful in skill building and relationship building, but also my experience as someone on the other side of things. So hiring, managing, and organizational development. I know very well the power and the pressure that can come with building a network. And so I'm excited to be here today with you all to talk more about that. A little
I
bit
love what
more.
you said, Sadie, around just that power and pressure. I think it's always an and. It's like it's so powerful, and there's just so much pressure around it. So I love that you're bringing in that perspective here today.
Yes, for any avid therapy goers, you hear this often in therapy. It's two opposite things can be true, right? We use and, not but. So we'll talk more about that as we get into content. little bit more about Sage. So our mission at Sage is to empower, educate, and transform. Primary way that we do that is, of course, through providing mental health services. So therapy, we see folks across the lifespan, and we see couples, individuals, families. And then we also work really hard to position ourselves as a resource for people just looking to improve their quality of life and their relationships. And so in addition to therapy, the way that we do that is opportunities like this one, where we're building community partnerships, relationships to expand our reach, trainings. We have a really robust intern program, so sort of training the next generation of clinicians and really leading with the relationship first. It's so important in therapeutic work. It's so important in community work. It really is at the heart of everything we do at Sage. And some quick stats about us. Now that we're in the new year, we're proud to see how 2024 wrapped up. We saw over 2,500 clients, which led to just a bit over 44,000 therapy sessions held. As I mentioned, we're operating across 6 states. We have 75 clinical providers, and we are looking forward to continued growth and expansion.
Love it. Thank you. And I also just want to thank all of you for being here today. I saw we are in all different time zones. It's near around lunchtime for most of us. And also you have busy, busy lives. So thank you for being here, for showing up. And with that said, as a token of our appreciation, we want to share with you at the end of our webinar today a book that you can have. It's a downloadable. We call it the Brag Book. It's meant for you to build that confidence. And the reason why we're starting with this is because confidence to me is at the root and the heart of some of that relationship and the association we make with networking. This is something that you can use not just when you're networking, but when you're having conversations with people, when you're having those days where you're like, I don't know if I should be doing this. This is a way for you to advocate for yourself. We love this internally at Vida. We use it all the time, and we share this with our clients. So we are going to give this to you at the end of this webinar as an appreciation for showing up today. Okay, you're like, why is there a coach and a therapist here? I thought we were talking about networking. Here's how we do this. It's not just about, and I love that you said this, Sadie, which is it's not just two opposite things can be true. It's not just therapy versus coaching. And we see clients who are like, well, do I need therapy or do I need coaching? And first of all, let's actually talk about what those two things are and also how they can either support one another. Sometimes it makes sense to have those in parallel. So I will start, since I'm already talking with the coaching lane. Coaching is about where you are today and where you want to go. So it's very focused on your present and your future goals. From a career lens, since we do a lot of career coaching, when we work with clients, they're coming to us and saying, well, I don't know what next is. I feel stuck. I'm trying to figure out how to do something that makes me feel fulfilled. And so what we're trying to do is understand how we get them to be unstuck. What does a future goal look like? How do we help them identify career paths that make sense for them? In addition to that, it's one thing to identify. The next part of it is, how do we help you get there? And networking is a core component of it. If there's components like negotiations, how to advocate for promotions. And so coaching really takes on this role of where you are today, where you want to go, and how do we help you get there with the practical advice and the experience that our career coaches have.
All right, I'll chime in with some thoughts on the therapy side of things. So I think the main distinguishing factor that I've got listed here is therapists are trained mental health professionals who can assess and make a diagnosis, right? And why that matters is sometimes a diagnosis actually can be quite helpful if we're thinking about the way we're impacted in a workplace setting, for instance. It could be helpful with accommodations, things of that sort. It also just gives us a framework for understanding ourselves. So a lot of what therapy is, and this overlaps with coaching, which we'll talk about, is that insight development, right? It's understanding who am I, what are my goals, not only in my career, but in my life and beyond, and where did that come from? Therapy can sometimes be longer term. It can also be short term. In therapy, sometimes we are working on healing from trauma, and maybe that could be a past toxic workplace experience or things that have happened just across your lifespan and your family of origin, et cetera. but it doesn't always have to be that way. Some therapy is short-term, more goal-oriented. Other times, maybe you're doing that longer-term therapy work, and then that's where coaching can be really helpful if the goals that you have for yourself at this point in your life are a little bit more focused on career-oriented things. So they pair very nicely together. A couple other thoughts, things that most of you probably know, but in therapy, you're coming there for a purpose, right? You want to improve your quality of life. You want to feel better. So we're doing a lot of development of coping skills. So learning about why am I the way that I am, or why does my body do the things that it does? What are these symptoms? And then how do I manage and cope with them? We'll get into a little bit more of this later. And the overall theme really is, in therapy, we're building a relationship with a therapist so that we can better improve the relationship we have with ourselves, with our loved ones, and with other people in the world. We're learning how to tap into self-acceptance, how to tap into self-compassion, how to really understand what is it that I want out of this one life that I have, and how can I tune into my inner power, my resilience, my insight, and the people that I'm close with, connected to create a life that's worth living.
Thank you for sharing that. As Sadie mentioned, it's really around both of them. What they do is they help to build that self-awareness. The intention is to build that confidence, because when you know something, you know what to do about it. So when you learn about yourself, it takes away this unknown power that actually holds you back from moving forward. The other part of how therapy and coaching work together is it creates a healthy headspace. So as an example, when we work with clients and we are very clear about, here's a roadmap, here's how we're going to get you from step 1 to step Z. If they can't come to the conversation focused, if they're having a hard time even accepting how to move forward, that's when we recognize and say, you know what? Maybe therapy makes sense, so that in parallel, while you start to heal, you start to come to that self-acceptance, so that we can also, in parallel, start to move forward with this roadmap that we've identified. And so it is really powerful when we combine the two together, if required. And I love seeing that in the chat. There's a lot of you who have worked in parallel. Sometimes there is a place where therapy makes sense and then coaching makes sense, and or vice versa. And so the intention here and why we're bringing this up is, the more you know, the more you can identify, where are you today? What support do you already have? And what support do you need to move forward? All right, let's keep going. Also, please keep the chat active if there's things that you want to talk about. And I just want to highlight, there's 61 people on this call today. What a beautiful and a safe way to network. Throw out your LinkedIn profiles if you would like to build your connections. If you haven't asked, start to do so. Okay, now let's get into the meat of networking and why this is important. So what has happened in the workplace is that there are now double the amount of applicants for any single role. So before, if things were competitive, that competition has just doubled and increased. And on top of that, in addition to the competition being so large and the volume being so large, we have a lot of people who are using fake accounts to apply. So if you think about it from an employer perspective, and Sadie, I'd be curious to see if you have an example of this. From an employer perspective, if I have a job posting and I have 250 applicants, guess what I'm thinking? Holy shit, this is a lot, and I am overwhelmed. How am I going to even navigate through the quality of it? And so what then happens is, I would prioritize who is somebody that I already know, who is somebody that has been referred from someone that I know, which is why 70% of jobs are found through networking. And when we say networking, it's about somebody either connecting you directly or because you have a second, third degree connection who says, you know what, I think Lawrence would be fantastic for this. And I want to recommend Lisa, and here's why. Because it takes away that burden. And I'm using that word, burden, for recruiters or the hiring managers to go through this mass volume. Now, I don't want you to feel defeated hearing the stat either. What that tells you is you have an advantage. you know that networking is the option, especially if you are looking to look for a new role.
Yeah, I'll chime in a bit here, because I think from what you're sharing is so real that we live in such a busy time. We all have so much going on. And so from a hiring perspective, when you're trying to dilute down, looking at resumes, looking at cover letters, sometimes they sort of blend together. And even the most standout applicant, you're just getting a few seconds, right? A minute maybe of a glance. And every organization, regardless of the size or industry, hopefully is looking for the right culture fit. In the same way, every candidate is looking to work at a place that feels aligned with their culture and their values. In order to make that determination, there has to be some kind of connection, right? And hopefully you make it to even a point where you're talking to a human being and you can cultivate some kind of connection beyond just your experience. But even better than that, if you know someone or know of someone in a role, they can speak to your character. They can say, this person would be such a great fit here for these reasons. And even just those extra couple of seconds can really make all of the difference. So these stats are not especially shocking, but cool to see.
What does this boil down to? It's that your network is your professional currency. I would argue it's one of the most important tools you have in your belt when it comes to your career development.
Okay, so we got to practice some surprise impromptu networking right when you
I
jumped
love
on.
surprising people.
Yes. You know what? It like mitigates the chance of anxiety. You showed up and didn't know what to expect it, and then it happened and you made it through. We'd love to hear from you in the chat or out loud if you'd like a little bit more about what that felt like. What did you share in your one-on-one? How did you build a connection? Did you build a connection? And just what came up for you? How did it feel?
And I'm loving all of the profiles that are being shared in the chat. Fantastic. Yeah, I'd love to hear somebody. Feel free to go off of mute. Share with us what happened in your one-on-ones.
I talked to Amy and we discovered that we're both in a season of career transition, not exactly the same type of career transition. And both of us have a goal where we're wanting to work on learning how to utilize LinkedIn to the best of our ability and setting up informational interviews, but that it can be a little bit overwhelming at times.
Thank you for sharing that, Liz. And what I loved is the fact that you both found your mutual common connection, which is you're both in career transition and there's a shared goal there. Oh. One more share. Melissa, not prepared. Oh, you felt lucky because you got Jana. She's amazing. And she shared suggestions to start networking. Yep. Was anybody feeling any sort of, from a feeling perspective, like I just walked through my title, or I talked about the weather, or I was too nervous and I didn't know what to say, so I let the other person lead? Any of those feelings? Potentially, maybe. If so, you don't have to share. And if you did, I just want to validate that that's okay too. That's okay too. Okay. Now, what we want to get to, and actually, Liz, it's like you said the perfect thing, which is networking is all about a relationship.
Exactly. And so it's just starting that initial connection, right? And sometimes it can lead to maybe something more tangible, like we had someone in the chat saying, I actually got some tips to use at a networking event tonight. And other times it's just finding that personal piece that might create opportunity to extend to something further. Also, every moment where we're harnessing a little bit of these networking skills is just practice. It's just another time that we've been able to look at another person, have a conversation, no matter how brief, and then walk away from that feeling a little bit more confident, even if it's just 0.5%. Like, okay, yeah, I can do this, especially in the post-COVID era where we're like getting back into just chatting with people, being around people, right? It can be really anxiety inducing. Okay, we're going to talk a little bit about some of the fears that come up around networking, right? The common stuff that can get in the way. I don't know that anyone will be surprised by these. These are basic human emotions that we all experience to some degree, probably pretty frequently. They're not uncommon at all. So common fear that comes up, rejection, right? We're worried about saying the wrong thing and having someone dismiss us, not making a good impression, feeling the pressure of like, oh gosh, I have to get it right away, or else I might miss this opportunity. Social anxiety, which can just be feeling overwhelmed by mingling with strangers, by making small talk. Sometimes social anxiety shows up physiologically. So that's my hands are sweating, my voice is shaky, I'm struggling to make eye contact, I'm feeling tense, I don't feel like myself. Lack of preparation is another fear that might come up. So walking into a room and just not knowing what to expect. If you didn't know what to expect, feeling like, oh gosh, I should have done something to prepare, but I don't even know what that was. I don't know who I'm going to talk to. I don't know if I'm going to know anyone there. I don't even know how to start the conversation. I feel awkward about walking up to someone or just making any sort of comment, right? Imposter syndrome. Anyone have any experience with imposter syndrome? It's real. Most of us, right, experience imposter syndrome. 80% of adults in the US have experienced imposter syndrome. And what we know to be true about data is like that's one snapshot. It's probably even higher than that. And 80% is pretty dang high. Imposter syndrome is that part of you that questions whether or not you belong, whether or not you deserve to be in a room, in a position, in a conversation. And it's that part of us saying, oh no, someone's going to find out that I'm a fraud. Someone's going to find out that I don't know anything at all. And it can be really debilitating. It's a fear that can really prevent us from putting ourselves out there. And being able to put ourselves out there is essential to building a relationship. It's essential to networking. We have to access some level of vulnerability. You don't need to go into a conversation with a stranger and start talking about your deepest, darkest secrets or fantasies, right? But even just sharing like where you live or what's going on in your life or that you're looking for a new job, that's information. That's vulnerable. So when we have these parts of ourselves getting pulled up, it can really make it hard to tune into our authentic self and show up in a way that makes it easy to connect. Being judged, all of us feel this at some point or another. Hi there. And it really comes down to this fear of what are people thinking, right? What do they think about me? Are they judging what I look like, what I sound like? Are they judging what I said or what I didn't say, or the fact that I used the wrong word? The good news is that most people think mostly about themselves. And we are sitting here thinking about ourselves, thinking that everyone is thinking about us as much as we are thinking about and criticizing ourselves. But that doesn't make it feel any less real. These fears can be the things that get in the way of us being able to move forward.
And Sadie, as you were sharing them, like how often do we just put all of our fears into a microscope and then over magnify the gravity of it and think, well, everyone's thinking what I'm thinking. And then therefore that debilitates us even more from taking action. I want to share a story. My first career out of college was in consulting. And, this was my first project. Luckily had, one of those managers, those people who just walk into a room and they're everybody's best friends. Like they can just start a conversation about anything and are everyone's best friends. So charming. And I just stare at him because my job is to build these relationships with our clients. I say relationships very purposefully because to me, relationships is networking. And I just look at him and I'm like, Dan, I don't know how you do this. Like, what am I supposed to say to them? And how do I start? He goes, Forum. So this client was in Seattle and he goes, start by watching the local news. Listen to what they talk about, Also know the Seahawks and make sure you know what's happening with that, because that determines the mood. And I just needed these pointers of watch the local news, don't put too much pressure on yourself. They like the Seahawks, start anywhere there. But the important thing is you don't need to force the conversation. You just need to start and let them lead the conversation. And that was one of the best advice I could ever have. And because it's helped me realize that the pressure is not on me to continue and carry on the conversation. I just need to start it. It's the flint, and then they have the spark to keep it going. When we have these fears, because we're in our heads, they can turn into mistakes. And so what are those? What are those mistakes that we often see? Is when we feel that we might get rejected, well, it's safer for me to not make an ask. So I'm not even going to follow up. Well, what if they don't respond to me? What if they say I'm not a good fit? What if they don't have time for me? I'd rather just not ask. So because of this fear, we don't take action. When we have this fear of social anxiety, it's like, I want to get out of this as quickly as possible. So how fast can I just collect business cards? Or how fast can I just get out of this conversation? Or avoid getting on the elevator with somebody so I don't have to talk to them and I'll just walk down the stairs. That lack of preparation, I will tell you, that was like my fear, is just, I don't know where to start. So I thank Dan all the time for giving me these tips and pointers. And over time, I've just built my own confidence to just start anywhere. Ooh, that imposter syndrome, Sadie, when you talked about it, I was like, yes, feel it all of the time. Then it feels like you network only when it's urgent or required. And when you do that, you put unnecessary pressure on yourself, and then you don't show up at your best. People like you when you show up at your best, because you're authentic, because you're you. And then being judged. Well, I don't know if they're going to like what I have to say, so I'd rather just keep it surface level. So I don't want to be vulnerable. I'd rather just talk about the weather.
All right. So now the meat of like, what do we do about it in therapy? We're going to hear more about what we do about it in coaching, but I'll kick us off here. How can therapy help with any of this? What I say when I'm talking with people about therapy is the first thing to note is that a good therapist is going to balance relational techniques with behavioral techniques. And what that means is therapy is only effective if you can build a relationship with the therapist, and it's the therapist's job to take the lead on that. If you can't cultivate a sense of safety and vulnerability with someone, your therapist, you're not going to be able to talk about or practice the things that are actually going to be helpful for you. So the relational piece, right, is just feeling connected, which is great because it's an opportunity to practice some of the skills that we're talking about. Just showing up, just being able to have a conversation. And then we're introducing behavioral techniques. So those are the more technical things. You'll hear therapy words tossed around, different intervention types. Every therapist has different training, different modalities and approaches that they use, but we're looking really for the connection piece and then the also tangible skill-based piece. So from a relationship perspective, in therapy, you're really doing some exploration and insight development about your lived experience. So maybe we're identifying fears, just as we've kind of talked through, understanding maybe patterns that we've experienced in our lifetime that can be self-defeating or even self-limiting beliefs that hold us back. Sometimes we're identifying the origin. I have that one starred here because it's not all the time. So it's a common misconception that if I go to therapy, it means I'm going to have to talk about my mother or my childhood experiences. That's true in some types of therapy, but not all. Therapy doesn't always have to be this deep-rooted, trauma processing work if that's not what you're needing at that point in your life. And sometimes you do go there. Sometimes that is what's necessary to deepen the way that you understand yourself and the way that you show up in your relationships. In therapy, we do a lot of validating and challenging. So it's back to that idea of two things can be true. We can hold two things at once. It can be completely valid and make a lot of sense the way that we're feeling. And also we have to do something with that feeling to move beyond it, right? To move into the next phase, to take action, and to access our motivation to improve our life. We learn and practice a lot of coping skills in therapy. So sometimes it's literally role playing, right? Like you might role play communication skills with your therapist. Sometimes it's exposure, which could mean you're making an agreement with your therapist. I imagine some of this probably also happens in coaching, to say like, okay, I'm going to do these 4 specific things related to networking or to job searching this week. And then you have this point of accountability to come back and check in a judgment-free way. Whether or not you do the thing doesn't really matter. Even just thinking about doing the thing is progress. We talk a lot about meta emotions in therapy, right? Feelings about feelings. So we really dig in. Something that I also think is important to highlight that's really helpful in therapy is therapists are trained to do a lot of psychoeducation. And so that is imparting knowledge onto clients about what is actually happening biologically, neurologically, physiologically, right? So why does fear and stress and change and anxiety create symptoms that are really distressing, either emotionally or physically, most commonly both? What's going on? You might, with your therapist, explore stress cycles, something called polyvagal theory, right? You might really explore the fight or flight response. That can be really important and helpful, especially if you're trying to navigate networking and you're experiencing the heightened sense of anxiety that gets in the way, where you like physically feel like, oh, I can't do this. Then you'll integrate mindfulness practices where you actually can train your brain to override or to soothe the fire alarm that's embedded in our brain that contributes to the cycle of stress and anxiety. So it's a lot of practicing, exploring, seeing what works in tandem with feeling connected to this other person, trusting this other person. Therapists are not the expert on you, but their job is to help you become the expert on you so that you can reach your goals. One other thing I highlight here, and sometimes this is can be a misconception, is most therapists are not prescribing medication. In some states that does happen, but most of the time prescribers are really trained to prescribe and manage medication. When you're looking for a therapist, you're often wanting to look for a therapist that is more broadly trained therapeutically versus prescribing medication. But medication management can be a helpful addition, right? An adjunct service if you're experiencing symptoms that are still really a barrier for you. And it's something you can talk about with your therapist over time if that might be helpful. Yeah.
And so what do we do about this in coaching? And there's many things, but I started with I would say the things that we see very common amongst our members, which is just start very small. And Meredith, I appreciate you sharing in our chat right now, which is, you're a coach recommended, you start with people who you already know. It's all about starting to get into action and the motion, because you're building a muscle. And when you start to have those wins, you're like, okay, I feel confident. I can do this with people I don't know. And that's okay. I can map out my fears and worst case scenarios. If people don't respond, they don't respond because maybe they're busy and it has nothing to do with you. And so what we do about it with coaching is, one, we need to take action, because that is the only way you're either going to validate and test your hypothesis and the assumptions that you have. We map out our fears, because when you name it and you can see it in front of you, you're like, whoa, I overdid it in my head. It was way bigger in my head than when you see it in paper and you go through your worst case scenario. Sure, you may have a bruised ego, but if that's the worst that happens, I think it's going to be okay. Going with a friend who's already involved. Those, somebody mentioned in the chat, like, I have a friend who can talk to anyone, including a tree and a rock. Great. Go with somebody who's already there, who can say, hey, you know what? I want to introduce you to my friend Meredith here. And here's why. The intention is to start building your capacity to say, I can do this, because you can do this. And finally, reframe your thoughts. Think about all the possibilities rather than what happens if this doesn't work out? What if they don't like me? Those fears that we talked about, Those fears cannot be the loudest voice. The loudest voice has to be the thing of possibilities. And I'm going to just put this out there again, which is recognize that networking is a non-negotiable skill. And if you don't like that word networking, recognize that it's all about building relationships. And this isn't about having 100 relationships. This is about quality connections, connections that make you feel seen, connections that make the other person feel seen. We're building a community here. So what are some of the best practices that we often talk about in coaching? One, you should be networking just all year round. Not just when you need something, but it's something that you follow up with and somebody that you communicate with consistently all year round. The easiest way to show value is to offer to be a resource to other people. Right? Oh, you know what? Last time we talked, you told me that you're looking for a graphic designer. I have somebody in mind that I'm happy to introduce you to. It costs you nothing, but it means a lot for the other person. When you're at a networking event, have a goal. And maybe a goal could be, I'm going to have 3 10-minute conversations. And what are you doing in that 10-minute conversation? It's going deep. It's about making sure that you understand something about this other person that is meaningful to them. That's when you know you have successfully had a deep conversation. You follow up and follow through. It's not just a one-time interaction. In fact, those relationships go deeper and deeper as you continue to have more and more interactions, which means, let's say you meet somebody for the first time at a networking event, schedule a coffee 2 months from now. If there's nothing immediate, 2 months from now. And then every month or so, send a follow-up email with a resource. Maybe that would be relevant for them. What you're doing is you're showing them that you care, that you are invested in the relationship. That's how you build it.
Forum, we have a great question in the chat. How do you keep track of the people you talk to?
That's a great question. I'm a spreadsheeter. So we actually at Vida, we have a template that we give to our clients that has like who you've connected with or who you're meeting with, what's important to them, how might they support you, what could be an ask that you may want to ask of them, because don't forget, you may have an ask. And so what are the things that you may want to consider? So we do have a spreadsheet that we use, if that works for you. Otherwise, you can use another form. The important thing is you want to remember those small details. Like on my phone, whenever I put a contact in, I always write down any relevant details about that person. So maybe they told me about a big trip they were going on, or maybe they told me about something that happened with their family. I write down key important details and names so that when I do meet with them, I go back to what we had talked about, which actually takes us to our networking script. Imagine you're just talking to a friend. Like when you go into a networking conversation, try to visualize that this is a friend who maybe you haven't met in a very long time. When you run into a friend you haven't met in a long time, you're probably going to start with, Sadie, so good to see you. Last time we met, you were telling me that your practice was growing like crazy. How has that been? Okay, so now I invite Sadie to connect with me, and she feels heard, that I remembered and seen. You know, God, last time we talked, I was at Vida. I'm still here with Vida. I've just been focused on starting to grow our company and making sure that we're really having the impact that we want. And one thing that I'm really focused on today is wanting to identify ways in which we can expand our network and our partnerships. What have you been up to? So even within the elevator pitch is what we're calling it. Instead of it being about your title or about something more transactional, you're going straight into something a little bit more meaningful. So what do I remember about Sadie last time I met her? What have I been up to that would be relevant and that can feel maybe even more pertinent? Like, oh, just came back from Disney. Not doing that again. I remember you talking about a trip you were planning. How did your trip go? But even something that's more, if you like humor, bring that into it. It always helps people put their guard down. Then going into what are you focused on or working on so that they know. And then you ask a question. So now you're starting to go into this dialogue. You find that point of connection, a shared goal. And you also want to make them feel seen, right? Sadie's like, gosh, I've been working on growing my practice. I may say, how is that going? Because I know that's a big undertaking. That's a lot, especially as a practitioner and wanting to grow the company. How are you doing? So inviting again a conversation. And don't forget your ask. If you have an ask, which is, so good to see you. I would love to just make sure that we're staying in contact. If you see somebody or talk to somebody who we're coaching might be a good fit, I'd love to make sure we're staying top of mind. Maybe we can meet again in a month. How's coffee? So maybe it's a follow-up, or maybe there's a direct ask. Oh, so good to see you. I have been thinking about looking for a new role. Do you know anybody in this industry that you may be able to make an introduction to? Is it okay if I look on your LinkedIn and follow up with you for introductions? The worst Sadie does is say no. And I walk away a little hurt, but I made my ask and I put myself out there. Anything you'd add to this, Sadie?
I think you did a beautiful job covering it. If anything, what we want everyone to take away from this is really having a rich understanding of how networking is about relationships. Finding a way to just connect with someone is the key. And I think it's helpful to think about relationships as a living, breathing entity, right? It requires being nurtured. I love a silly metaphor. Any of my clients and staff know this, but I sort of think about like house plants, right? Some of them are really finicky. They require a lot of attention, pruning and trimming and watering and regular support. Others are succulents or an air plant. I have one. I've never watered that thing. It's still alive. Every once in a while, once a year, I tune in and I'm like, you probably need something from me. It can be really overwhelming when we think about networking and just the volume of, oh, I need to make a lot of connections. I appreciate, the question we were talking about keeping a spreadsheet. We do something similar at Sage. I am not a spreadsheet girly. They overwhelm me. When I touch them, they break. So it can feel hard when we're thinking like, oh gosh, how am I going to keep track of all of this? It's important to give yourself permission to remember you don't have to do it all. So some relationships, they're more like succulents, right? You can check in periodically every couple months, or when you happen to be at that same annual event that you go to together. That can still have value. Just a brief conversation with someone where you're really focusing in, as Form was sharing, on making someone feel seen is enough for them to remember you and for you to remember them. You're going to recall someone's vibe, if you will, probably a little bit more than you might even the specifics, and vice versa. So really giving yourself permission to tune into this idea that networking is about relationships, and relationships are something that maybe don't come naturally, but they're essential. It's an imperative part of existing. And it's a combination of skill and practice and your natural authenticity. Your ability to show up as exactly who you are is what's going to make you be memorable and allow you to remember others and then take those relationships one step further.
All right, we're coming towards the end of our content, and we started this with networking, and where I know that's been the focus, but zoom out. Let's zoom out and put this around context, which is networking is just one step in the life and the career that you're trying to cultivate. Building relationships is continuous. And I love what you said, Sadie, which is it's a living, breathing thing. It's something that can be continued to improve on as long as we actively work on it.
Okay, so thinking back to 50 minutes ago when we did those surprise intro, our surprise networking, based on the conversation we've been having now, if you were to do your one-on-one again, how would you do it differently or not? Feel free to share in the chat. if anything shifted for you in how you understand this or feel about it.
And as you're sharing, I just want to highlight just, you know, I know that for some of you, I see some clients here, and Sadie, you may as well. And for some of you, you're new to coaching, you may be new to therapy. And so wanting to share a little bit more about testimonials, people who have worked with us before and what they say and what they get out of it, because I know that it could be a scary thing when you don't know. We have people who have really come with, you know, it opened up possibilities for me. It allowed me to think about, just shift my perspective to understand why this is important and what I can do about it. I love the testimony you have, Sadie, of like, I've gained so much peace. Because I have peace, I can show up and act.
Yeah, I think in all of these, it really highlights what we're talking about, which is just feeling seen is the key, right? These aren't testimonials saying like, I've accomplished all of my goals and everything in my life is 100% better. It's like, I felt valued. I felt connected. I feel inspired. Those are all about relationships.
And thank you for those of you who have been sharing in the chat. Just going back to where we started, which is thinking about, where are you today? Where do you feel you already have support? And where might you be stuck? And if you are stuck, how do you move forward from that? Is it working with a coach where you think about your career transition and thinking through what it looks like to move forward? Is it therapy when you're thinking through, do I need to do some healing? Do I need to come towards more self-acceptance? Or is it both? And with that, we promised you the brag book. This is a QR code. You can go ahead and scan this, and what you will get prompted to is to be able to download this. I highly recommend it's something that you keep active and open all the time. Anything good happens, write it down. This is great when you're talking about even performance conversations, when you're interviewing, when you are having one of those down days and you go back to your brag book and you're like, yeah, I've accomplished a lot. So feel free to scan this QR code. And if you are curious about what it looks like to potentially work with a coach, what it looks like to work with a therapist, we have 2 QR codes for you that you can use. So for Vida and for Sage, you are able to, no problem, we will put in the QR codes. It's on the link. I will send the links on the chat. But you can scan the QR codes here for a consultation. It's a complimentary consultation to see if coaching is a good fit for you. And same thing with Sage as well. I will link out the brag book in just a moment, and also the links for Vida if you are looking to have a consultation, or with Sage. And with that, we want to thank you. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, put the links in the chat, and see what questions we have, as we have 5 minutes remaining. So opening this up to the group, what questions do we have? And just a moment while I grab our links. Okay, link to the brag book. I put that in the chat. There will be a follow-up email as well. And now let me get you. We have one thing, Lawrence. Lawrence, thank you for sharing that. It's very challenging when you feel stuck emotionally as well as practically. You're holding your own self back, but also getting negative or no feedback or no opportunities. And it's become one big close stuck circle where it all feeds on itself. Sadie, any reactions to that?
Yeah, this is so real. I think anything that's cyclical is in and of itself challenging, right? And something that Forum and I talked about actually in developing this webinar was how challenging it can be to hold, once again, 2 things at the same time, where sometimes there is very real urgency around needing to network for a purpose. It's super important to do it all of the time, but sometimes we're doing it because we need to make a career change. We need a different job. And you can't just get rid of the very real factors that make it feel so important, so critical. But then while you're experiencing that, it can get in the way. And that leads to exactly what you're describing, Lawrence, which is the stuckness. The best way to address a cycle is to find a way to interrupt it. Oftentimes that is by tapping into networks of support. So maybe it's therapy, maybe it's coaching, but it's doing something different, right? We have to disrupt it in some way. It doesn't have to be something extreme, but figuring out a way to pause, to explore what's going on, and to pivot, to try something different. It's really hard to do something different when you're already feeling overwhelmed and stressed. And that often is the starting point, right?
For sharing that. We have another question, which is, how do you start a conversation, really an email to someone you haven't connected with for, let's say, 10 years, but they're potentially in a position to refer you for a job application? This was me. Here's what I would say. I'm a script person. I would say, hi, Liz. Gosh, it's been a long time since we've connected, and I hope you and whatever I remember about them, I would reference. And you and so are doing well. Last time we talked, you were in Chicago. Are you still there? What's going on? I'm reaching out because I'm interested in applying for this one role, and I see that you still work there. If you're open to it, I would love to have a 10-minute call with you to learn more about the organization, reconnect with you, and also share what I've been up to and see if this is a good fit, and talk about how we can get me in front of the right person in this role. Can we connect? I'd love to buy you lunch. They're in the same place. Or I'd love to buy you virtual coffee, and send them a $5 gift card. It doesn't take much. And let's connect next week for 15 minutes. You want to be direct. You want to be concise. And again, that relation. You want to make sure that you are being clear about what your ask is, and you're offering up an opportunity for them to show up and share their perspective as well.
I'll add a little therapist tidbit onto the tail end of that, which is we talk a lot about assuming positive intent and good intentions. Most human beings are good, although it can be hard to believe that, especially in today's world. But most of us want to help. Most of us want to be asked to help. It's a pleasure to receive an email, even if you haven't talked in 10 years. And so when you're in the vulnerable position of asking, it's easy for that anxiety to tell the story of, they're going to think I'm just like someone who's trying to mooch off of them. I haven't even spoken to them. If we can tap into, let's assume positive intent here. Let's assume that most people like to be helpful, like to connect. It can free us up to do the hard thing of asking, of sending the email, of taking that first step.
Great point. And I know we're at the hour. We want to thank you all for starting your very first journey into this networking. I mean, courageous to be able to share your LinkedIn profiles, to even have the conversation today. So thank you for showing up. We are here as resources for you. And we know you can do this because everyone is very good at building relationships, and you can just do that too. So with that, thank you all for joining us.
Thank you, everyone.